Now that we've completed our discussion on sense-based abilities, we can go more in depth into feeling and knowledge-based abilities. Now, normally that particular category of talents should be better broken into two separate pieces, the feeling side and the knowledge side. The problem is that many of these types of talents, it's pretty impossible to tell if they fall more into the feeling or the knowledge, because a lot of them use both. And in different people, they actually might manifest in different ways, even though it's the same basic talent. This is because these type of talents rely on things that we don't have as much experience with. For example, the senses we use all the time, so we have an understanding. We have a bit of experience and knowledge about what it is, so to go beyond that is a little easier. With a lot of these talents, for example, it's not so simple, because a lot of the things we don't have direct experience with. Some of us do, some of us don't. It's a personal thing. And as a result, a lot of times it's more complicated because of that simple lack of experience. Now, for any of these types of talents to work, as with most talents in general, there is three pieces that are required. That, of course, is the ability itself. Now, that isn't something that you can truly train. You can train to develop, you can train to understand and grow, but it's something that you're born with. The abilities and skills you have, whether you manifest them or not, are there at the day you're born, probably before that point. So we need the ability, that's first. We also need the ability to power the ability. We need to have enough energy, enough faith in ourselves, enough trust, enough permission to allow it to work. So a lot of that comes through practice, through trying the techniques that are here, the tips and the tricks, and growing and evolving our natural talents. As we become stronger energetically, spiritually, or however you want to look at it, we of course gain more talent. Oftentimes these talents tend to be the kind that they start a domino effect. When you connect to one, it opens the doors to connect to others, because what happens is as you use one, it builds up your strength and it helps power others. So the ability has to be there and the power has to be there. Now, what happens if you have those two and not part three is that a lot of times they'll manifest willy-nilly. They'll do it whenever they feel like it as it occurs. Now, this is what happens with most people. Talents will manifest out of nowhere. They'll come unbidden, unwanted even in many cases. But our reaction to them determines what happens next. So if we're receptive to them and willing to accept them, it's easier for more to come. If we, of course, get scared and want to shy away and run away, then we're more likely to close it off, which connects directly with part three, which is will. It's the ability to control it. If we will ourselves not to have an ability, we'll shut it off. The power and the ability don't matter because we'll physically close it. Once in a while, it will probably sneak through and do its own thing, but in general, it won't be there. Same thing, if we have the will to make it work, but we lack, say, the ability or the power, it's not going to work. If we have the will and the ability, it's still not going to work because we lack the power. That's why faith and trust is so important, because we need to develop all three. You know, even though the ability is stuff we're born with, it still requires training. So that's what I'm here to provide. Now, because this specific topic of feeling and knowledge-based abilities is so much more in-depth than the simple sense-based ones, this section is going to have to be broken down into pieces, mainly to give me enough time to explain them to you in enough detail. So what we'll do is we'll start with the most common, the one that everyone truly can say that they possess, although everyone does have the ability to different levels. That, of course, as I said in other sections, is the ability of intuition. Now, intuition is a rather unique talent because even though it has its own ability, it can mimic everything else in the sense and feeling based as well as knowledge based abilities. All three of those things can be mimicked by intuition. As an example, looking back at a clairvoyant gets an image which gives them an insight or a feeling or an emotion or information that gives them whatever it is they're looking for, knowledge, a glimpse, something. With intuition, it'll happen that we actually get the information, then we'll create a picture because that's how we better associate. More often than not, it's about will. That if we've accepted the fact that we'll allow pictures to come in, intuition will use that because it's a channel that's open. So intuition is a lot more complex. Now, intuition itself is very simple though. It's primarily about the end result of all of this: knowledge, feelings, and insights. So we use intuition to get an impression or to get knowledge about what's coming, how a person is, what we should do. It's used in many different forms. A lot of the other types of techniques like tarot reading and palmistry and all these other things are using pieces of intuition as well as potentially other gifts, because that's basically what intuition is about: getting knowledge, getting feelings and impressions. Now, to develop intuition is a little bit more complex because there isn't specific defined talents that can be used to develop it. What we can do though is sort of prepare ourselves. As I said earlier, sometimes a lot of these abilities, if we have them, will manifest as we gain power. So a lot of the tools and techniques with knowledge and feeling-based abilities are more about creating a history of reaction, about how we deal with these kind of events by creating them outside of the specific talents. For example, I myself, when I was developing my intuition, would used to go to the drive-thrus. I would get impressions about the people behind the mic, like if they were tall or short, what color hair they had, how long their hair was, what color their eyes were, if they had glasses. Now, this is a great thing to do because it creates that history. Because when we get these impressions, we're more willing to accept them because we've got practice accepting them. Now, it's important to realize that things like this, as you might already suspect, do come with a twist. The main thing is, impressions like that aren't necessarily provable visually. They're not provable through other senses because there's pieces that we don't have. As an example, someone with blonde hair may not actually be a blonde. They may be a brunette, but they've dyed their hair. Someone with short hair may have recently cut their hair when they used to have it long. So there's lots of things like this that can change. So the impressions that we get, it's important not to rate them as accurate or failures or right or wrong, but just to accept them that this is what I felt. Because you really don't have a way to guarantee at this level whether you were right or wrong, and it really doesn't matter. Again, we're creating a history of acceptance with these abilities. So that's simple things. You can do more in-depth. You can, before answering the phone, you can try and get an impression of who's on the other end, not looking at the call display or picking up the phone first. You can, in the online community, you can connect with other people and try and describe them. Look at what color hair they have, how long, and see how often you can hit it right. Now, because there's a more direct interaction, you can access those other pieces. They'll tell you if they've recently dyed their hair, for example, or if they're recently cut it. And it also allows you to access things that you couldn't at the drive-thru, like the color of their shirt, for example, or their pants. Let's face it, at the drive-thru, everyone's wearing a uniform. So that's really not a very good test because it's all basically standard. So a lot of the abilities that we're going to discuss in the next sections on feeling and knowledge-based abilities are somewhat similar, but I'll go more specifically into details for each one. Just remember that intuition can mimic them all, so it's better not to define what you can do by the label, but just accept everything that you can do. And don't worry about how it works or why it works until you've got a good history of using it. That's the best bet. So now we'll start going into some of the others in the next pieces of this section. So by all means watch them and we'll go into more things.